On a Friday night in June of 2025 in front of 12,269 fans at Devon Park in Oklahoma City, and a national television audience watching on ESPN, a young woman from Caddo Mills, Texas, stood on a softball field with tears streaming down her face. The University of Texas had just beaten Texas Tech 10-4 in the Women's College World Series Championship Series. It was the first national championship in the history of Texas softball. And the transfer who had come to Austin only 12 months earlier, the one player on the roster who had not been part of the previous year's heartbreak in Oklahoma City, had just gotten her hands on a national championship ring. Her name is Kaydee Bennett, and she stood there on that field at that moment, crying, both happy and sad, because she was the only person on the entire Texas roster who fully understood what had to be survived to arrive at that place. Because 2 years earlier, Kaydee Bennett had walked away from softball completely. She had hated the game. She had called her coach. She had called her parents. She had quit. And behind that decision was a life that had been coming apart in ways that most people never knew about. This is the story of Kaydee Bennett, the heartbreaking one, the one behind the smile and the championship rings and the burnt orange jersey. It's a story of loss, of survival, of faith, and of a full circle that almost didn't happen. And it's one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in modern college softball. Let's go back to the beginning. Kaydee Bennett grew up in North Texas, in the small town of Caddo Mills, out past Rockwall, in the flat farmland east of Dallas. She was the daughter of Kyle and Melissa Bennett. From the time she was 7 years old, she was on a ball field. She played volleyball, basketball, track, softball, and even golf as a middle schooler. She was the kind of kid who tried everything, worked at everything, and won at almost everything she picked up. Softball, though, was the one that stuck. She started her high school career at Sunnyvale High School in a suburb east of Dallas. As a freshman, she batted .635 with 10 doubles, 5 triples, and 7 home runs. She scored 41 runs, drove in 27, and stole 24 bases. She earned all-state honors. She was immediately one of the top freshman softball players in the state of Texas. Then, before her sophomore year, she transferred. She moved to Caddo Mills. There is a reason for that move, a reason she would eventually share publicly, but only later. For now, she just kept playing. As a sophomore in 2020, before the season was cut short by the COVID-19 pandemic, Bennett batted .627 with 8 doubles, 2 triples, and 4 home runs. She scored 43 runs, drove in 21 more, and stole 47 bases, a total that ranked among the national leaders. Her team went 18-3, and by the time she was a senior at Caddo Mills, she had signed her letter of intent to play at Oklahoma State University. She was going to one of the elite softball programs in the country. She was going to leave Texas for the first time. She was living the dream that most high school softball players in America chase for their entire adolescence. Then, right before her senior year of high school, she quit. She quit softball completely. She called her Oklahoma State coach. She called her parents. She walked away from the game she had played her entire life, the scholarship she had spent years earning, the future that everybody around her had assumed she would run toward. And she hated it. She hated softball. If you knew Kaydee Bennett only from a stat sheet, that decision would look inexplicable. But Kaydee Bennett was carrying weight nobody at practice was seeing. She would eventually share, in her own words, what had been happening in her life during those years. She had been in an abusive relationship. That relationship, and its damage, had been part of why she'd needed to change high schools in the first place. Part of why she'd moved from Sunnyvale to Caddo Mills. She was struggling with an eating disorder. And on top of all of it, her mother, Melissa Bennett, had been diagnosed with cancer. The way Melissa's cancer was discovered was, in Melissa's own later words, something like a miracle. She had been in a car accident. When doctors ran a scan of her shoulder to check for injuries from the crash, they discovered a cancerous tumor. The accident, in that sense, saved Melissa's life. But it added an enormous emotional weight to a family that was already carrying too much of it. For Kaydee, a teenager working through her own trauma, watching her mother go through cancer treatment, trying to hold together a softball career that she was supposed to be building toward Oklahoma State, the pressure of the sport became unbearable. As she put it later, softball became something she had to do. It stopped being a joy. It became an obligation stacked on top of every other obligation. She couldn't carry it anymore, so she walked away. Her father, Kyle, was crushed. He would later say, very simply, that he never got closure, that the decision just happened and it broke his heart. That is a very hard thing to hear from a father whose daughter has walked away from the game they had built together. It's the kind of statement that carries in it years of drives to tournaments, years of catching pitches in the backyard, years of watching a daughter grow up on a softball field. All of that in one phone call, suddenly gone. Kaydee, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how to be a person again. She enrolled at East Texas A&M University in Commerce, then known as Texas A&M Commerce, a school close to home. Not to play softball, just to be a student, just to heal. In her own words, life is bigger than softball, relationships, everything. I'm very religious. I leaned on my Bible a lot. It carried me. She spent that fall semester grieving, healing, praying, and being a normal college freshman. She did not touch a softball. She did not go to the field. She gave herself space. The kind of space almost no elite young athlete ever gives themselves. And then, in February of her freshman year, she made a choice. She decided to walk on to the East Texas A&M softball team. Not because she had to, not because she owed anybody anything, but because she wanted to know, and was it softball she had hated, or was it the weight she was carrying while trying to play softball? If she stepped back onto a field and she still hated it, she would be done. Her parents accepted that. She gave herself permission to walk away again if it felt wrong. She did not walk away. In her true freshman year at East Texas A&M in 2023, she slashed .320 with a .390 on-base percentage and a .352 slugging percentage. She was named to the All-Southland Conference freshman team. She was the only true freshman named to that honor. She had come back to the game on her own terms, and she was already one of the best young players at her level. The next season, 2024, she transferred to Abilene Christian University. She played on a team that finished 16-32 that year. Records like that can bury a hitter mentally. Bennett did the opposite. She hit .425. She led her team in hits with 62. She led in runs with 41. She led in triples with 5. She led in on-base percentage at .500. She was second in stolen bases with 15. She was statistically one of the best hitters in her entire conference, on a team that finished more than 15 games under .500. She kept her head down and kept producing. She was nervous. She told the story later. She wasn't sure if she was good enough. She had bounced from junior college level competition to a low Division I program, to a mid-Division I program, to what would now be a major SEC program on the verge of a national championship run. She said out loud that she wasn't sure she belonged, but she knew someone on the Texas roster, a player named Kaydee, presumably Kaydee Stewart, and she took the meeting. And she told herself, I'm going to let them bring me in. And Texas brought her in. She was, that year, the only transfer on the Texas softball roster. Now, think about that context for a moment. The 2025 Texas Longhorns were coming off a heartbreaking loss in the 2024 Women's College World Series Finals, a loss to Oklahoma that had taken away the national championship a year earlier. Almost every player on that Texas roster had lived through that defeat. They had been sitting in the losing dugout at Devon Park in Oklahoma City. They had promised themselves and each other that they were coming back to finish it. Into that locker room walked Kaydee Bennett, the one player who had not been at Devon Park in June of 2024. The transfer, the junior, the kid from Caddo Mills whose softball career had been reborn from something almost nobody knew about. And she told them, as she'd tell an interviewer months later, we're going to win a national championship. That's going to be us. A full circle moment. The season played out the way Bennett had promised. She played in 65 games for the 2025 Longhorns, starting 64 of them. Her raw batting average was .250, modest compared to her production at Abilene Christian, but reflective of the toughest pitching in America, the SEC in its inaugural year for Texas softball. She logged 28 runs, 37 hits, 15 RBIs, 18 walks, and hit 2 home runs. She was 10 for 14 on stolen base attempts. She played primarily at second base, and she settled into a lineup that already had Kaydee Stewart as its emerging power hitter. She was named to the College Sports Communicators Academic All-District Team. a nod to the fact that in the middle of navigating a Division I softball season at one of the toughest schools in America, she was excelling in the classroom too. And when Texas made it to the College World Series, and then made it through pool play, and then made it to the finals for a rematch with Texas Tech and their untouchable ace Nigeri Kennedy, Kaydee Bennett was in the lineup. In Game 3 of the WCWS Championship Series on Friday, June 6, 2025, she went 1 for 2 at the plate. She singled, she stole a base, she scored a run, and one of the runs she scored came home on Mia Scott's grand slam that gave Texas an 8-0 lead in the 4th inning and effectively ended the game. Bennett was on second base when Scott hit that grand slam. She trotted around the bases and touched home plate with the softball equivalent of a mountain climber standing on top of an impossible summit. Texas won 10-4, first national championship in the history of Texas softball. And Kaydee Bennett, the transfer, the junior, the kid from Caddo Mills, had spent the entire season telling anyone who would listen that this was how it was going to end. There is one more piece of this story that has to be told. In February of the 2025 season, while the Longhorns were building toward what would become their championship run, Kaydee's mother Melissa was released from cancer treatment. She was okay. She and Kyle were able to attend nearly every game of that championship run in person. When Kaydee stood on the field in Oklahoma City at the end of that season, national champion, holding a trophy, her parents were both alive, both healthy, both in the stands. She would say later, "I remember feeling happy and sad. I was crying. It was such a different experience. It was amazing." Happy and sad. Because the girl who had been crushed by an abusive relationship, who had transferred high schools, who had battled an eating disorder, who had watched her mother go through cancer, who had quit softball hating the game, that girl was standing on the biggest stage in the sport, wearing burnt orange, holding a national championship. Softball had almost taken everything from her. And now, on the far side of that valley, it was giving her something she could barely put into words. She has spoken about that arc very openly, and she has been very consistent in one particular way. She credits her faith. She credits her Bible. She says in her own words that God carried her through everything. "I feel very grateful," she said after the championship. I'd tell that little girl in the Longhorn uniform, enjoy it. Let God take you. He's got you. That is who Kaydee Bennett is, a young woman who fought through several kinds of pain most 20-year-olds cannot imagine, who found the courage, twice actually, to walk back onto a field she was allowed to have walked away from, who transferred 3 times and never once made it about her own resume, who arrived at the University of Texas as the only outsider, the only transfer, on a roster full of returning heartbreak, and told that team out loud that they were going to win a national championship. And then she helped them do it. Her story is not the story of a superstar recruit. She is not on the cover of a magazine. She is not the leading scorer, the leading home run hitter, the SEC Player of the Year. There are teammates of hers who are all of those things and more. Her story is the quieter kind. It is the story of a supporting player, playing the game hard and clean, working through pain that most people never see, and refusing to let any of it be the final chapter. The heartbreaking part of the Kaydee Bennett story is real. The abusive relationship, the transferred high schools, the eating disorder, her mother's cancer, the moment of quitting softball entirely. All of it is real. She has shared it herself, publicly, honestly, in her own words. That took courage too, but so is the other part. The 2025 Women's College World Series champion, the kid who scored a run in the game that ended a program's decades-long chase for a national title. The transfer whose belief in the outcome came true. The daughter whose mother sat in the stands, healthy and cheering, when the final out was recorded. The young woman who has said without hesitation that she is grateful for every single moment of the journey, even the parts that almost broke her. That's the full circle. That's the girl in the Longhorn uniform. And the woman she grew into, standing on the field together in Oklahoma City in June of 2025. Happy and sad, crying. Both of them at the same time, national champions. That's the story of Kaydee Bennett, and it is why, whenever you see her on a highlight reel or on a Texas softball graphic, it is worth remembering that you are not just watching a college softball player, you are watching someone who fought for the chance to still be doing it, who almost didn't get there, and who, when she did get there, brought a whole lifetime of pain with her, and left every ounce of it on the field of a stadium in Oklahoma City, on a summer night in 2025 in a Texas Longhorn uniform. That is what heartbreaking story really means when applied to Kaydee Bennett. It's not just the heartbreak that came before the championship. It's the miracle that the championship came at all. And nobody in Austin, Texas is ever going to forget it, least of all the young woman herself.